Ladies and gentlemen, welcome one and all to iWizard. This is a special segment that I've been hosting about a Song of Ice and Fire, and I'm calling it Knights of the Mind. A little bit of a Maester reference there. Also, heads up, this is going to be a spoiler chat, so we're definitely going to get into the plot in this chat. But first, I want to introduce my special guest. He hails from Dorne, though he can be found frequenting the brothels and the back alleyways of King's Landing. His sellsword name is Muad'Dib Mike. He is the GOAT of BookTube. He is unbowed, unbent, unbroken. Welcome back, Sir Mike Martell.
Yes, stay off them streets of Flea Bottom, guys. That's my area. Stay out, stay out.
And next up, we have the Queen of Throne Zone and the First Man, protector of Mike's Books Discord, the mother of several children, but probably also of some dragons as well. She is the breaker of chains, the wielder of the great clipboard, first of her name, the Unburnt. Welcome, the lovely Madison Targaryen.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for the introduction. I love that.
Of
Yeah,
course.
that just blew away mine on Throne Zone for sure. Jeez.
Yeah, step up.
Long overdue for sure. So I wanted to start out just by asking the boring question to you guys, which is, what did you like about A Clash of Kings? And specifically, what did you like on this reread? I know, like, for me, this is a second reread, or this was my first reread. So this is the second time I'm reading through all of these books. And I just wanted to know, like, what reread are you guys on? Is this your second or third? Mike, it's like your 100th time. And what do you like about it?
Ladies first. Go ahead, Massey.
Oh, thank you. So this is my third read through in about probably 4 or 5 years. I am somewhat, in the grand scheme of things, a Song of Ice and Fire newbie, I suppose. And I never really considered this. I mean, Game of Thrones is probably my favorite book ever because I love beginnings, and Westeros is my favorite fantasy world. So it's just the perfect introduction. And I think it's almost just a perfect book. But I forget how much I love this book. And I think it's because we get to spend a lot of time in King's Landing in this book. And as a huge Lannister fan, specifically Tyrion, I mean, Tyrion's my favorite character ever, but I have a lot of love for the Lannisters in general. And it's a weird love because, I mean, they're not good.
It's a brother-sisterly love?
I mean, it's something very familiar like that. I love the way their minds work and stuff. And we get a lot of of course, Tyrion's the only one with the POV at this point, but we get to spend a lot of time with Cersei and more time with Jaime than we ever have before, and more time with, Tywin. Like, I just think that we get to focus on some of the mindset of a Lannister, but in general, just a lot of time in King's Landing. And even the POVs that weren't my favorite in the last book, like John, for example, I think he has great chapters in this book. So I just think, I don't know, I just forgot how good it was. And I mean, I think I always do. I forget how good these books are in general until I'm actually back in the world and reading them. And then you are like, why do I ever read anything else? Like, these books are perfect.
I think a shorter answer for me would be asking what I don't like about the book, honestly. I think this one, it really opened up the politics. And for me, look, I love the action. I think George writes amazing action. He does. But what makes this series so different than everything else is its in-world politics are just like untouchable. And I most time in a book, I'm like, okay, this is enough time at court. Let's get out of the throne room and go see what's going on. With this, as soon as Tyrion shows up in King's Landing, just, basically comes in there with his balls in a wheelbarrow, like, hey, check out this letter. I run shit. It's just so good watching how it's almost like, and I don't want to, like, I'm not making any real life references here, but it's almost like when you have a a governor or a senator for your state who does like nothing, and then they finally get like uprooted by someone, and the new person comes in and boom, 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 all the stuff starts getting done. You're like, I don't even know how to react to this. That's what it seems like when he shows up and all of a sudden stuff starts getting done. So I love that side of it. And of course, Tyrion, MVP of this book, without a doubt. I thought he was good in the first book, but this was the book where he became my favorite character. But as for reread number, I couldn't tell you. I reread these first 3 a dozen times probably. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of anything to say that you guys didn't already say. I agree with all of that, especially the Tyrion stuff. The way that Tyrion really seems to grow and come into his own, and he really becomes less like this figure to kind of feel bad for and mock, and this real powerhouse, this mind, this kind of Machiavellian, just this thinker, this political maneuver behind the scenes. I love the struggle. That's just the dynamics over who is going to take the throne. The fact that there are so many possibilities, and when you read it the first time, you genuinely have no idea: is it going to be Renly or Stannis or Robb, or is Joffrey going to keep it? What's going to happen to Sansa and Arya and all these characters? And the stakes are so high, and it's just packed with so much suspense. I'm trying to think of other things that I just really love about it. We get to meet Brienne of Tarth. That's cool. Big Mama Tarth.
Yeah.
Love watching her kick some ass. I like the stuff in Karth too, with the sorcerers and with
I mean, the House of the Undying, that's one of the most
House of the Undying.
Yeah.
the entire series. I mean, I used to get out a notebook way before this was a series and write everything that happened in that chapter, what I thought each of them meant. I wish I still had that, because I'm sure I was wrong on every single thing that we actually have answers for.
Yeah. And then you get you know what I like too, which is kind of, you rarely hear people talk about this, is the fact that everyone has their own name and explanation for this comet, and how it's this kind of unifying thing that threads the entire book together. Just these simple things that to me make the world feel ancient and less connected than our own. The time it takes for one house to learn about what another house is doing and things like that. And you know what? I wanted to mention this. I didn't want to forget this. I think my favorite passage in the entire book, and this is going to be very idiosyncratic, is the Jorah Mormont story of his second wife, Liness.
You just stole something that I was going to talk about later. But hey, yes, it's a great part. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we could save it for later, but it's
go ahead.
So sweet and so well told and so tragic and sad, and you just really feel it in your chest. So
that's something, since it is my first read in like 10 or 11, whatever Dance of Dragons came out, it seems like a lifetime ago. That was the last time I did my previous reread. So that was something this time around, like I had totally forgotten about. And no matter how many times I read this, because I think I've gotten to a point now where the show kind of has almost replaced a lot of my headcanon, because it's been so long. And because I watched a lot of, especially those first like 2 or 3 seasons, because I was writing about it, I watched all those episodes, 2 or 3 times. So I think, sometimes you kind of try to remember, did it happen in the book or did it happen in the show? And did it happen on the show and not in the book, or did it happen in the book and not the show? So I have a hard time remembering that. So getting those confirmations this time, especially that one with Lenny's Hightower, was something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that it is a great reminder, not just in fiction, but in life in general, that there's 2 sides to every story. And even though he did do something wrong, like not only is it against the law, but it's morally wrong, like you do get some like empathy or sympathy or something towards his situation. And it reminds you once again that Ned, while always honorable on paper, doing the right thing, didn't always make great choices. Like, and it kind of makes you think, or at least it did for me, like big picture, like, Ned, what did you do for us? Like, again, like he was following the law, but it's always the letter of the law. And sometimes like I just get so caught up in that sometimes. And all of Ned's choices always come back to me like, okay, on paper, I do see why he did that. But almost every choice he makes, I end up kind of disagreeing with it fundamentally. And this is another one that I'm like, did you even listen to him at all? Or did you just throw the book at him. So it's just a good perspective to know that like sometimes Jorah is kind of villainized in our heads, but like, you know, he was in love with a bougie lady that just like, you know, bled him dry. So I don't know. It's just an
I think
interesting
your
thought
crush on
process I
Jorah
always have.
Mormont, your crush on Jorah is clouding your vision. That's what I think.
Maybe. Maybe it's my crush on what's his name? Ian, what's his name? The actor.
I can't remember. Ian Glenn?
Oh, I can't remember his name, but I do have a crush on him.
Way handsomer than he's actually.
It is. In the book, he is not a looker like in the shows.
Do you really have a crush on Jorah Mormont?
The actor.
Yeah, but I have lots of crushes, so it's okay.
I mean, he's no Tywin, but you know.
I know. Yeah, that's my number one crush forever is Charles Dance. So
I can actually see that. I can see that more than I can see Jorah for some reason. I don't know why. No, to your point about Ned. I think I was mentioning this to Mike and Scott last time we talked, or maybe it was just Mike. But this is a point that Machiavelli makes: is you can act like you're a good man, but are you really a good man when you can't protect your family? And so, and we're not just talking about your house gets robbed and you're overpowered or something like that. We're talking about he makes we always talk about Ned Stark as the only good person in Song of Ice and Fire, but there's a sense in which his principle gets in the way of him being able to be a good man because he forgets the kind of world he lives in. Maybe to be a good man in the kind of world that Ned lives in, maybe a good man doesn't behave that way because that's what happens to him. If you behave that way, you get your head cut off. So, and then look what happens to his children, and that's kind of the world he creates. And so, yeah, I'm kind of conflicted about Ned too. The more I think about it,
Yeah, I mean, you go back to the very first chapter of Game of Thrones. I mean, deserters from the Night's Watch, they get executed. But did he even listen to anything he told them? No. Like, he was so set on, taking this guy's head off because it was the rule that he didn't listen to a word he said. And like, that was a bad choice in the end. So.
For sure. So I know that we all here, I've heard all of us at different points say this, that we think a Game of Thrones, we think of it as being one of the best first books in a fantasy series that you could possibly have. It's up there with Fellowship of the Ring. Do you think Clash of Kings improves on the first book? In other words, is it a better book than Game of Thrones, or is that just impossible to say? What do you guys think?
Ladies first.
Yeah, so it's a trick question because you can't have one without the other. Like, you can't have a great book two without I'm saying, like, book one sets up everything that makes this book so good. But yeah, I do think in ways that it is better because it expands on the world building quite a bit. And like Mike said, what makes these books so good is the dialogue and the politics. And this book is just absolutely busting with amazing. Like, when you asked me when we were kind of prepping to pick a favorite quote, I was like, oh, cool, no problem. And then I sat down and really started working at it over lunch. And I was like, this is stupid. How am I going to pick one? There's like, I can make a top 50 because there's so much good dialogue in these books that it's so hard to narrow it down. So I guess like on paper, it probably is because it does have probably some better action. It shows growth. With a character like Jaime, he went from being somebody who was just like an incestuous, mustache twirling villain. And in one scene, all of a sudden, we realized that there's depth to him. Like, literally, it was one scene and it changes everything we know about him. And like, there's so many examples of that type of character growth that happens in small nuggets, but makes big steps forward. That I think you could arguably say that it's better because it probably even keeps people's attention a little better. But to me, Game of Thrones is so special to me that it's hard for me to outrank it. But this book was, I felt like it was a total page turner. It was awesomely paced. And like I said, there are some POVs that are better. Like Sansa's POVs are better in this book than they are in a Game of Thrones. Jon's are better than they are in a Game of Thrones to me. So I think it technically it would score higher for me, but I just like heart-wise will always love Game of Thrones more.
Yeah, I think there's some nostalgia attached there, obviously, because with this book, after what happens in a Game of Thrones, to me, it's like, okay, well, can he surprise me anymore? Well, I mean, spoiler, yeah, he can still surprise me. George can. But I think with this one, I went into to expect, okay, well, shit, no one's safe anymore. I can come to expect. I mean, hell, we had a kid get pushed out of a window and get crippled, and we had our main character die. So it's like, okay, I nothing can surprise me this time. But it's hard for me to look at this and say how is not better. I think that the dialogue is better. I think a lot of the chapters that she already mentioned. I'm not going to kind of rehash what she said there. But you think especially about Sansa. I think is after Ned dies. I think this everybody always complains about Sansa chapters, but I was like, but after Ned dies, she's a way different character. I think that's something that's that you can really tell in a reread how much you will enjoy something like that. But this, it's just like, look at the Battle of the Blackwater. I mean, that is amazing. You have anything that epic in the first book, and I'm not one of those, people who's like, oh, I gotta be like an MCU fan. I gotta see something blowing up every 3 seconds. But damn it, when he does it, it's freaking awesome, isn't it? So it's hard for me not to look at that and the stuff beyond the wall with stuff that I was really curious about, waiting, to read book 2, to read book 1. So yeah, I feel like it does a lot of things better. So it really is just to me as a maybe a nostalgia thing. And I'm like Madison, I do like beginnings. I do like the first book. I like Fellowship's my favorite book in Lord of the Rings. Empire of Silence is my favorite in Sun Eater. So I think that happens quite a bit. But it's like, if you ask me to distinguish why, I think book 1 is better than this one. I don't know if I could do it.
Yeah. Another thing that A Clash of Kings has that Game of Thrones only barely had a little bit of, and that was the prologue, is a horror aspect. And you get that several times in this book, in my opinion. You get it in The House of the Undying. You get it basically anytime Melisandre is on the page. And there's just a little more of like a supernatural, like tense, dark horror feel in this book. And it happens 4 or 5 times versus to kind of like 1 time in the previous book. So if that's your thing, if you really like that dark, blood magic, what's going on here, warlocks and, red priestesses, like you do get more of that. And I definitely dig that.
We have very different definitions of horror. A hot redhead that can do magic. That sounds incredible to me. There's nothing
has ghost babies that'll kill your enemies.
You're burying the lead though. Hot redhead.
Gotcha.
We share that affinity for hot redheads. You're right, Madison.
Stannis.
There's more religion and there's more magic, and I really like that we, and George never he's not like Brandon Sanderson, where he will write a treatise about the 15 rules of magic and of like using like coins to like fly around and burning metals and all of this. He gives you a little glimpse, a little tease, a little glimpse, and you feel like you don't understand how the magic works, but that's what's so kind of beguiling and fascinating about it. So I agree with you guys, and you guys both pointed out too the shift in characters, which I really liked. That there was really a growth in the characters. And as we've pointed out, especially Tyrion, he becomes a much more formidable person in this book. He's coming to his own, I feel, in terms of how formidable he is, his ability to lead, his ability to be a political operator, even a warrior. And I feel like we're meant to just take Tyrion more seriously in this book. Just the way he plays everyone in those chapters off on one another, where he's testing everyone on the royal council, their loyalty, and telling everyone different stories to see who will tell Cersei. And of course, just this vast, complicated game that Tyrion's playing to try to get his brother released. Like that slow build up to the war, having the ironsmiths build the chain and the wildfire and all the maneuvering behind the scenes, imprisoning what's his name, Maester Pycelle. And then, as you pointed out, Mike, Sansa too undergoes a really interesting metamorphosis, just in the sense that she's always been this naive, dreamy girl, right? Who wants
like a princess.
A princess in a tower, who just wants to be swept off her feet and wants to have beautiful children and wants to see King's Landing and just wants to go to tournaments, and just this sense that her life is going to be this magical, idealistic paradise. And she's learned all this stuff from these heroic ballads, and that's what she thinks her life is going to be. And
she's got drunk Sir Dantos and drunk Hound like all over the whole book.
That all falls apart, and you really get to see her come face to face with the fact that her reality will never match her fantasy, and that, as Hobbes says, life is what does he say? Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And she just kind of realizes that, as the Buddhists say, life is suffering. And it's like kind of funny. No, it's not funny. That's mean. It's not funny. It's interesting to watch her realize that, to watch her kind of grow up and realize that men are not as wonderful as she always dreamed that they would be, that her future isn't as wonderful, that power doesn't work the way she thought it would work. And then lastly, I'll just say that Catelyn too she changes and goes through a lot because she's navigating all of this stuff about how to unite Robb with Renly, and how to be a mother, but needing to take a step back to let Robb be his own leader. Anyways, there's a lot going on there, and I think a lot of it has to do with how the characters develop.
Whatever. If Catelyn was smart, she just would have went there and bent the knee to Stannis like everyone else needs to, right, Madison?
Well, we have pretty different
no one
Stannis
agrees with me on
opinions.
Stannis.
I know. Well, no, actually, a lot of people do. So, like, I've just to kind of like touch on some of the characters you were kind of overviewing. I've kind of always been a Sansa defender, only because the things that really bother her about in book one, they're all true. Like, that's all accurate. But from my perspective, I'm just like, she was acting exactly how she was supposed to. She was raised from birth to basically, I mean, her official betrothal to Joffrey wasn't official until, that book. But it had probably always been in the back of everyone's mind. And if it wasn't going to be Joffrey, it would be a really, really good match still. Like, she's the eldest daughter of Ned Stark, who is not just the Lord of Winterfell, but the Warden of the North. It's a massive alliance. So no matter who she was going to marry, she was basically going to be the equivalent of a queen or a mini queen. And so she was raised to be exactly what she was, to act how she acted, to expect what she was expecting. And yes, it was naive and it was spoiled and it was ridiculous, but that was all she ever knew. And so it is frustrating to be like, oh, what a brat, and she's so stuck up. But that she adapted pretty quickly given her circumstances. Like, she started changing, in my opinion, after Lady was killed. And it was, of course, her big wake-up call was her dad being beheaded in front of her. But yes, it is obnoxious that it's not the most fun to read. But I need my fantasy to be realistic in the sense that it has to be how real people would act, and she to me is acting exactly how she would act in that situation. So I'm always a big Sansa defender. With Tyrion, I agree with everything you said, but this is a book that I do actually feel really bad for Tyrion in, because in the first book, I think we want to feel bad for him because he's a cripple, he's a dwarf, all dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes. Like, so he's kind of setting us up to be like, oh, this little guy, he seems pretty smart. What can he do? And then everything you said about him in book 2 is true. Like, he does make big moves. He is smart. He's maneuvering. He's showing, how big his balls are and all of this. But at the same time, his reputation is being ruined all around him. And all he's doing is the best he can. And not only is he just doing the best he can, he's doing a good job. Like, he's actually doing a really good job as Hand of the King. Yeah. But he's trying to protect his family's image. He's trying to protect his brother. And he's trying to save King's Landing. And meanwhile, everybody in the city is just going, well, as soon as this guy shows up, everything starts to suck. And his sister hates him. And everybody on the small council hates him. And everybody just assumes he's messing up because a lot of his plans kind of have to stay secret and stuff. So I just feel so frustrated for him, because to me, like, the worst feeling I can have is feeling misunderstood, but still having to stick to what like, I know what I'm doing. And that's his whole journey through this whole book, is being misunderstood by everybody around him, but having to keep his head down because he knows he's doing what's right for everybody, but him having to constantly take blows. Like, he's not enjoying his life. The woman he loves is being hidden away, and she's mad at him, and the council's mad at him, Cersei's mad at him. And I just feel so bad for him, because I feel like he's misunderstood, and I feel like that bothers him like it would bother me. And I feel for him.
I want to add to that. That is good writing, because I hate to compare it to something so kind of, I don't want to call it trivial, like to young adult. So when you read Harry Potter, people don't realize that one of the things that makes Harry Potter so satisfying is one of the things that gets you so into it is the tension that she builds when Harry gets in trouble and he didn't do it. Does Harry like go to the headmasters of the school and say, well, let me explain. Here's what actually happened. It was actually his fault.
Because Dumbledore never talked to him.
No, he doesn't say any of that. Everyone just hates Harry, assumes that everything was his fault, and yet Harry has to do the right thing. And it frustrates you as the reader, but that's actually what also keeps you turning pages. So I agree actually with everything that you said. And I want to add too, that we also get Tyrion, and I hate to say this because it's gross for some reason, but we get him as like a lover in this book and as a kind of a sexual being. Like we actually get a sense of his lusts and his yearnings and his kind of deep passion in a way that we get to think of him in a way that we don't think of, that we're not prompted to think of him in the first book, which I think is kind of interesting as well. And the last thing I want to say is, you talked about Sansa, and I think you're right, actually. And maybe the reason we expect Sansa to be other than she is because I think Arya is set up as a foil for her. Arya is the opposite of Sansa. And she is, and again, as you pointed out, Sansa's being bred for this role. Arya is not being bred for that role. And so we kind of compare Sansa, like, what would Arya do? You got the bracelet on, what would Arya do? And so in any given moment from what Sansa would do. So, one question I thought was really interesting that I think is at least worth mentioning is I'm interested in the fact that of all the contenders to the throne, we don't actually get any of their perspectives. So
isn't that interesting?
That's really interesting. Well, we get Daenerys, but she's the only one where we get to see her point of view, and she's gunning for the throne, but she's so far away from it. But everyone else is kind of ghost-like. Everyone else is kind of like far back from us, and we only really get to see what they do. We don't really get their perspective. And I was wondering why you think that is, and if you think that helps or hurts the narrative, or what.
That's a really interesting point, and I think it kind of plays into the same reason that in most books we don't get the POV of the villain. Like, it's more interesting to get the perspective of the side characters and their, what the main characters' choices and what their actions, like the ripple effect and how they're perceived by the people around them, is probably more interesting than someone who's just like king. Like, they have we have one goal in mind. And I always say this, and it's this way with TV for me, and it's this way in most books for me, is the main protagonist is usually not my favorite character, because I am way more interested in the people around them. And so I think that's kind of what he's going for is the main protagonist is there to drive the story, or these people. It's called a clash of kings. So there's these 5 or 6, if you want to think about Mance Rayder, but there's all these people that are gunning for elevating themselves or becoming some sort of king or going towards some sort of goal. But really what's interesting about that is not their trip to the throne, but it's about the people around them, either supporting them or opposing them, and what their goals look like from a different person's from their view.
Yeah. And Mike, what we were just talking about, the fact that it's interesting that of all the contenders for the Iron Throne, Daenerys is the only one that we get to see as a point of view. And why is that? And what kind of effect does that have on the narrative? And is that a good thing, or would we want to get to see the perspective of some of these other characters, or would that spoil things? I don't know what you think about that.
I missed the first part of the question. What?
Oh, just the fact that there are a bunch of people gunning for the throne, and it's a Game of Thrones, and we don't really get any of those people's perspectives except for Daenerys, and she's very far away from the throne, and so and we get the perspectives of these kind of side characters, or these kind of advisors to the people who are gunning for the throne. So I was wondering what you think about that.
I never really thought about it, honestly, that Daenerys is the only one we're getting the POV from so far, huh? So yeah, I guess I never really thought about it that way. So that you just taught me something.
Okay, well, I'm curious because you said something to me a while back, and apparently it's not very controversial, but I thought it was controversial. Is the Stannis question? What do you think of Stannis, Mike? His claim to the throne is the best, considering what we know of Joffrey's parentage. But Renly, was he right to think that people wouldn't want him as their king? Why do you think he has the best, not only the best claim, but do you think he, of all the choices we have, would make the best king? I don't know.
Yes, all the way around. It's one of those kind of things where like, hey, if we have an election here and I don't like who wins, that's still the elected official, correct? And that's just how those things work. So I'm sorry, I don't use the, oh, no one likes you, Stannis, as a reason why he doesn't have the best claim to the throne. Sorry, that doesn't work for me. He's the oldest brother and he should be. So I've always been, and trust me and my wife have been having this fight for a decade. Okay, it's fine. And her whole thing is nobody likes him. Who gives a shit? And I think that actually, if you want to look at it, he may not be the most loved king, but I think he would be very good at it because he is very businesslike. He is very professional. I think he's firm but fair. And I think he's what the kingdom needs.
So I am not a Stannis fan, but I do think that according to the law, he absolutely has I'm not just the strongest claim he has. I mean, he's the rightful heir to the throne. But again, if we're just going with, I think I was trying to think about this recently because I'm like, what is it about you and Stannis? Because he's just not that likable isn't a very good reason. And I was thinking about it today, actually. And I think what it comes down to for me is from the moment we meet Stannis, he comes across as desperate. And that comes across as weak. And that doesn't set well with me. And there's that sense of desperation that he doesn't have any strong convictions or morals or grounds because he's willing to change everything about himself to possibly have a shot at something that he just thinks is his by right, because it is his by right. But it's like one of those, if you asked him, Stannis, why do you want to be king? He'd say, because it's my right. But like, what do you want for Westeros? Like, what are your goals for King's Landing? Like, what is your vision for, I don't know that he has any passion behind it. He's just desperate to make it so because it's right.
See, I disagree with desperation. I disagree. I think it's more bitterness in that he thinks he should have been picked to be hand of the king.
To me,
the role comes back up, and then he picks Ned. He feels slighted by this. I get that, and then of course Renly. Renly's a whole nother onion there to kind of peel. But I think it's more bitterness than it is desperation. Besides, let's look at this. We started with 5. We're down to 4. Who's still there? Oh, Stannis is still there. Weird.
Yeah, to me, between the prologue chapter and the first Davos chapter, to me, they just reek of desperation, like grasping at straws. And that whole ceremony on the beach it's like everyone around them is just like, what the fuck? And that's not how you build people around you that want to be there. And that is always his downfall, is his people are just there because they feel like they have to be. And I don't think anybody really supports Stannis because they really, other than Davos, because they want to. And that to me makes him, it's not somebody that I could ever feel comfortable being like, we need because it's the right thing to do. Like Ned, of course Ned wanted Stannis because Ned and Stannis have the same fatal flaw, but with different motivation behind it, I think.
All right, let me play devil's advocate here. All right, so why does Daenerys deserve it? Because it's her right? So you're telling me she doesn't seem any more desperate or seem very much
There's a lot of legacy behind her claim, though. Hundreds of years.
But you know what? She lost. Her house
lost. So why not try to win again? Trying to win again is the natural order of things.
I'm just saying, I don't see how one can be seen as desperate because maybe they aren't like inspiring or the best leader or something like that. Whereas the other one who's just going to be holier than thou and act all high and mighty when, you were in a field at the beginning of this book, dying of thirst, looking at a comet, but you got some dragons. Well, hey, cool. I hope they can make some water for you. So I don't see it as that. With me, with kings is I want the person who says they don't want it because it's their right. They want it because it's their duty. He doesn't want it for the power. He feels like it is his duty. So that's why I've always been behind Stannis, because he looks at, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm going to do it. Just like when everyone says, oh, he shouldn't have been able to hold Storm's End, and look at the desperate measures he went through to hold Storm's End. during that. A lot of people would have just turned tail and just let it go. And he didn't. He was eating rats for months, to live there. So to me, it's more about that he's willing to get his hands dirty to do what needs to be done because it's his duty, not because I want power. I don't get that out of him. I get that out of Daenerys. I definitely
No,
get
I don't
that.
ever think it's a power thing. I think it's just he feels like it's owed to him. And again, you're probably not wrong about Dany's motivations either. But again, hers has hundreds of years of family legacy to back it up. And he has not even one full generation.
But they lost. Sorry, I don't give it to him because
win again.
Well, you know what?
Again.
The Chicago Bulls won 6 straight titles or whatever, but you know what? They lost that next year. I wasn't like, no, it should still be theirs because it was theirs before. No, you got beat.
Well, sports is a little different.
Maybe. That's the closest analogy I could make. Sorry, Jordan, we're like going on.
No, it's
my wife has been arguing about this for years.
It's an interesting debate. I'm glad you're having it. And so part of me, I sympathize with both perspectives. There's a part of me that says if we're playing the monarchy game, then Mike is right, that you want it to go to the person who feels it's their duty. Stannis has the best claim to the throne. But then there's another part of me that thinks that Mike's being a little bit naive, like Ned, doing the very standing for Stannis, doing the very principled thing when history has taught us and Fire and Blood has taught us that your claim to the throne really doesn't matter. It's about power. And it does matter if people are going to be able to follow you. It does matter if you're someone who follows through on what they say or sticks to their principles. For example, I too was unsettled, Madison, by the fact that he's just like, oh, the religion that we've believed in for forever, and the religion that all of my people believe in, yeah, we're just not doing that anymore. And I'm not even that into it because I'm kind of like, I don't even believe in God, but we're just going to go this way. And my wife wants us to go this way, so I'm going to go this way. And there's a great quote I wanted to share with you. This is from the blacksmith that forged Robert Baratheon's Warhammer. He says,
great side character, by the way.
Yeah, he says, Robert was never the same after he put on that crown. Some men are like swords made for fighting. Hang them up and they go to rust. Robert was a true steel. Stannis is pure iron, black and hard and strong, yes, but brittle the way iron gets. He'll break before he bends. And Renly, that one, he's copper, bright and shiny, pretty to look at, but not worth all that much at the end of the day. So what do you think of that?
I think he's a blacksmith and he's going to make a lot of comparisons to the materials that he works with.
Yeah.
And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. It's not like anybody here is saying, hey, no, Renly has the best claim. I mean, I don't think anyone here is saying that. No.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
But also, like, Robert Baratheon was willing to kill to get what he wanted. That's what conquering is. And I think when you have no legacy other than one conquering, is your family legacy worth as much as a family dynasty that's been there for 200 years when you've only conquered 16 years prior? So if conquering is all it takes, then I don't see any reason why Renly couldn't just take Stannis out. And because I think Renly plus a really good hand could have been a pretty decent monarchy.
Yeah, the people.
So that's why I was always team Renly, not because I thought he had a stronger claim. He clearly doesn't. But I think Renly with a really good queen and a really good hand could have been an excellent monarchy.
Well, see, no spoilers for books past this, but we know things about Marjorie, so I don't know how that would have worked out. But
I didn't say Marjorie.
Okay. Well, also, I got to bring up the whole thing that George plays with a lot now. You realize these are point of view chapters, and you're only getting one side of the story. Now, if you go to those chapters in King's Landing, the people are calling for Stannis. So you're saying like, oh, no one wants Stannis. I think, no, you're seeing it from Catelyn's point of view, and you're hanging out with Renly there. Of course, no one wants Stannis there. But at King's Landing, everyone thinks Stannis is coming to save us all from this monster named Joffrey. So I think your assumption that no one likes Stannis because you didn't like him on the television show, that's a joke mostly. But yeah, again, I'm a little bitter about this myself because, like I said, me and my wife have been back and forth about this for like a decade now. So yeah, it's hard for me to bend the knee on this issue.
All right, I'm going to move on a little bit, and it's all good. So one thing, this book is about I would say one enduring theme or motif is journeys and hardships. Whose journey do you think was the hardest? Who went through the most?
She was dying in a field of grass at the beginning of the book, I would think. They walk across half the east, don't they? So
what about Arya though? Arya has to dress up like a boy.
Journey, like actual like journey. Okay, you're talking about like their overall journey.
Yeah, Arya and everything with Arya and Harrenhal, it's possibly some of my favorite parts of this book, for sure. No.
What pisses me off about Arya in this book is every night you go to bed and you have a kill list that you recite. And you get someone that says, I'm going to knock 3 names off that list, and you use 0 of them.
I know.
Right.
Tywin is right there.
That was
the
pretty.
It's right there.
Yeah. There's Tywin Lannister right there. No, she made some poor choices, but like she has like 9 also. So that's something to consider. But I really just liked all the interactions with everything going on at Harrenhal, and you do learn so much about the history of that holding, but everything around it. I just really do like those chapters a lot. But it is frustrating when she is offered, this golden opportunity and she kind of squanders it big time.
No, they're great. I like the part where she's upset about the cock that she didn't have.
Yeah.
Not my words, guys. That's George's words. Her and Gendry stuff is really good.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to move into 7 Kingdoms, 7 questions, okay? I prepped you guys for some of these, but some of them will be surprises. Number 1, what was your favorite character? We'll say character in Clash of Kings.
Are you going to make me go first every time?
Yeah.
Ladies
I'm
first.
worried what if Mike and I pick the same thing?
It's all right.
Okay.
I can always
reasons.
repeat you or just say,
again, so I'm going to say Tyrion, because Tyrion is my favorite character. And we get 13 Tyrion POVs in this book. So it's very Tyrion heavy. So like Tyrion is my favorite character, but man, I can easily talk myself into a couple because we get some awesome moments. But yeah, I mean, definitely Tyrion, favorite POV, favorite character.
Yeah, I mean, how can you not? I mean, you think about what Tyrion goes through in this book, and the fact that he's like Batman. He's 3 steps ahead of everybody here. He's trying to not only run the kingdom, he's trying to fix like feuds that have been going on forever. Like he's trying to fix this stuff with Dorne. He comes up with a solution. It's like, yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. Why has no one thought of this? That's what I talked about. Like he shows up, stuff started getting done. But then you look at after the Hound like limps out over the fire. Tyrion, this is 2 books in a row now. This dude's going to go out and do a little war and fight and live. I mean, he gets all jacked up in this one. And you know what? God bless Podrick Payne, because I actually forgot that Podrick was the one who actually saved him there. So that was really, really cool. But it's just awesome. He does everything. He's a man of action. He's a man of words. He's a man of politics. He knows how to do everything. He's really, really great at being the hand. That's why it sucks that he does all this. And then Tywin shows up at the last minute, and Tywin's going to get the credit from everybody.
It's all the credit.
Oh man, it's so frustrating. As a younger brother, that's frustrating.
That scene where he wakes up and doesn't know where he is and realizes that no one, like his dad, hasn't come down to talk to him about how he saved the city, and no one's proud of him. No one even realizes what all he did to secure that victory. Like that is so heavy. Like that is a heavy chapter.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah, I'm with you guys. I think it's like inarguable. But because I want to say something different and be interesting, I will say that I've always been a big fan of Catelyn. And I think especially in this book, she is rebounding from having her husband killed, and watching her try to balance these competing roles of mother and daughter and political advisor. She's extremely important. And all of this is starting to weigh heavily on her. And Robb doesn't seem to appreciate her. He sends her away. She has to figure out how to do this incredibly difficult task of securing an alliance between Robb and Renly. It feels like she's always at the edge of a precipice, like at a breaking point. She wants at this moment, after she's lost Ned, to feel weak and protected and to just kind of crawl in a hole, but she has to muster her strength and carry on with her mission. And so I feel like a lot of her journey is her coming to pull herself together and show real strength as a woman and as a mother and as someone who I think is really crucial and important to the book. So.
I appreciate that, because I think the only character people complain about more in Sansa is Catelyn. I think Catelyn's a great character. And like, is she doing anything in that first book that any mother wouldn't do in that situation? I mean, everybody talks about them. Like, how would you react? Maybe you don't have kids. You don't know. That's very much how someone would react to their kid getting thrown out of a window.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah, and I am a mom, and I'm not a big Catelyn fan in general, but she always has awesome chapters because she is doing interesting things and around interesting people and goes places that no one else goes. That whole parlay with Renly is so good, where we get to meet Brienne, and then again when she goes with Renly to meet Stannis, and that scene with the peach, so good. So she's not a character really I enjoy, because her choices do frustrate me. Even as a mom, her choices frustrate me, but I really enjoy her POVs.
Yeah, her choices.
Jamie's scene was great. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to talk about that later.
Her choices frustrate me too, and I'll have to defer to you, Madison, but I feel like, and I guess my opinion probably doesn't count as a man, but I feel like he writes women really well. Not that I know what it's like to be a woman, but that I know women. And when I read Catelyn chapters, the worries she has, women are very conscientious. They care so much. And the worries that she has, she's constantly neurotically worrying over her children, obsessively trying to calculate in her mind at all times what is the best course of action, how to do the right thing. And George writes her he writes her POV to have all of that bouncing. It's a very interior, subjective perspective. When you read Theon's chapters, he's very exterior. He's just action and doing this and feeling these lusty feelings. She's got these real kind of cerebral worries and concerns and plans. And that's how most of the women I know are. My mom and my wife, they've got a million things on their minds. There's like nothing going on up here at any given moment. But most of the women I know, especially these strong, competent women I know, are kind of like Catelyn. They've got a lot going on up there, and they've got a lot on their shoulders, and they're trying to manage everyone's lives in a good way. And that's how I feel when I read her chapters. I just think he does that. Am I wrong about that? Does he write women well, Madison?
I think that's a great point, because we get a lot of POVs from women in these books, and they're all so different. Like, we get Daenerys, we get Catelyn, we get Sansa, we get Arya. Later down the road, we get some others. But right now, we're looking at 4 women that couldn't be more different from each other, but they all seem very, very realistic. And I don't personally relate to all of them, but there's something about each of those women that I relate to and I see myself in. And I'm like, that's exactly what I would say or what I would do. Or I know why she said that, but luckily I have a bird's eye perspective, so I can sit there and go, no, don't do that. But you're right. There are some situations where you're like, it was probably dumb, it was probably rash, but would I have done anything different? Probably not. So I do think that George writes female characters really well, and I don't think he gets enough credit for it. And in fact, he gets a lot of flack for no reason.
Yeah.
Because I think he writes humans in general very realistic. And I think that's a lot of times what this grimdark genre comes around to, is writing realistic humans. And we like to call it grimdark, but in reality, I think it's probably just somewhat more realistic than, the fairy tales we like to be fed. But I do think he writes women really well. And I think there's something you can identify with all of his human characters.
Right. And it's funny that he gets flack for it, but that someone like Brandon Sanderson doesn't. Like, and it's not just like the way that Martin paints women, it's the situations that women are in and the things they have to go through. Like in a medieval world, the constant threat of rape, or just the kind of the male gaze, just the actual real way that men talk to and look at women. George doesn't cover that up or hide it. Whereas, you read a Brandon Sanderson novel and a woman walks into a bar and all the men are intimidated, and then she has an arm wrestling match with them. And then it's like, hey, she's tough. Whoa, better watch out for her. And it's like a 7 foot tall guy who's really burly. And it's like, better watch out for her. And George, George isn't trying to cover that stuff up. There are real concerns that women have. There are the things that men do that no one likes to talk about. And I think he paints the brutal reality of that. And I think you're right. That's part of what Grimdark is good at doing, I guess. Yeah. Question 2, before I get myself in any more trouble, what is your favorite chapter or scene or just general part of the book?
You want to switch off, Madison, so you don't feel like you're taking all the number 1 seeds, or
Yes, and like this again, you say whatever you want, because no matter what you pick, I can find a backup.
I know what
because
chapter
this
you're
was hard to
picking.
pick one.
I know what
Too
chapter
hard.
you're picking. We're not picking the same one, so you go ahead. Favorite chapter?
So I think I didn't do my homework well enough because I don't remember the actual chapter number, but it is a Sansa chapter. And it is the scene where Cersei and Sansa are together with all the women and children during the Battle of Blackwater Bay. I cannot find a single thing wrong with that entire chapter. The dialogue is 10 out of 10. The tension that's being built, because we know what's happening outside of those walls, and we know that it's dire straits, but we also know that there's hope. Like, we know that Tyrion has a plan. We know that they're not just dodos out there. They're not just, sheep left for the slaughter. There's a plan going on. We have some hope, but from their perspective, like, it's a very different situation. And like you said, medieval women have a completely different set of worries and problems than even the modern woman. And Cersei spends this time again, we only know so much of Cersei from A Game of Thrones. And I do think they set her up to be quite dynamic in that first book. But it's this scene where we really get to see a lot of different shades of Cersei Lannister. And in one sentence, she can go from being maternal and comforting and kind almost to being cold and cruel and cutting. And it's like she's preparing her for the worst, but then also still being like demeaning and manipulative. And I just love everything about this chapter. And I think at this point, I probably read it 10 times because I just think it's so well done, because it's a woman's chapter, because you're getting all this fear, and you're getting the palpable sense of dread that they are all like, we're either, and Cersei, and the way she takes charge of her, she's like, listen, I know what my reality is here. Like, either everything's going to be 100% fine, or I'm going to be brutalized and raped and murdered. So I'm not doing either of those things. Like, I'm either going to be fine, or I'm going to die a nice clean death. And I just respect the hell out of that. And so I don't know that I'm willing to put my name on it and say that's my favorite chapter of the entire book. But it was so hard for me to choose that I kept coming back to that one mentally. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to call it. That's an incredible scene. And it's just, I think it's brilliant on many levels.
I thought you were picking Catelyn talking to Jaime based off of a prior
stuff. That's my quote for later, but yeah.
Oh, okay. With most times in this series, every single time you ask this about it, it's going to be something political, usually, or backstabby. But this one, I full on and just give me the action. It's Tyrion, I think 13 and 14 or 12 and 13. Obviously, guys, this is Blackwater Bay, the Battle of Blackwater Bay. I mean, this is just, we've seen him use his mind, and now we get to see him like in action, and he's not afraid to go out there and get his hands dirty. And you know what? It's just, I love the line where he's like, those are brave men over there. Let's go kill them.
Yes.
Wow. Dude's got he's got the thrill, as Dalinar would call it, since Jordan likes to keep Brandon Sanderson tonight. I'll bring that up. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's usually going to be anything that's super, super political, or just the complete like shocker. But this one, I'm all here for the action. I think it's just so well written, and you even kind of want to wrap Davos in it. Just like basically that last third is just so good. Everything that's going on at the Blackwater is so good.
Yeah, you took mine. I was going to say that. And then I was just going to say, there are so many chapters I could pick from. Even the prologue in this is incredible. I remember the way that I felt reading it a second time, putting it down after reading the prologue. And then I could pick like 10 different chapters that I really like. But I was going to say Battle of Blackwater Bay. I guess I had this thought halfway through this book. I am constantly astonished at how cheap books are, because this is weeks and weeks of entertainment, and you get a huge bang for your buck in this book. There's so much stuff in this book, so many great quotes, so many great chapters, and you just put the book down and you're like, this is what it's all about. So I don't know that I could pick one. You stole mine, Mike. So I'll just go to the next question. What are your favorite scenes or moments or ideas from the book that the TV show doesn't show? Like, what do you feel the show leaves out that the book does well? It could be an element of the book that the show just can't do.
So this one was hard for me to pinpoint. And I'm not sure why. And maybe it's because it is honestly a really good adaptation. And of course, there's a lot that gets left off of screen that's done so well on page. But it is a good adaptation. And this is such a silly thing, but I miss it every time I'm watching the show. And that is the presence of the Shagga and the Mountain Men and all of Tyrion's crew. Like, Tyrion has quite a group of people around him of him. Yeah. And I do wish that had been included. I mean, we see him in the show for like 2 minutes. Shagga, and I wish we would. And that's just, again, it's kind of a world building thing. It just makes everything feel like rich and interesting. So I'm sure I'm going to think of something later that I'm like, oh, duh. And like, I think there is one really obvious answer. And so if Mike or you don't say it, then I might touch on it again. But I didn't say this because I feel like everyone's going to say this. But go ahead.
I mean, we kind of talked about earlier that the stuff that I didn't really even recall about Sir Jorah's first wife. Stuff is really good. I wish they would have done that in the show, but I'm going to go with Sansa and the Hound stuff. I felt like that really just got completely neutered on the TV show. It just had point. What Peter just kind of whispers it in her ear in the first couple episodes or something. That was it. That was all we ever really got of it. I love their dynamic and hearing, like, I have no idea what his intentions or motivations are, but the fact that
it keeps you guessing. Little bird.
Her, but he's in love with her, but he wants to protect her, but he wants to kill her. I'm not even sure what he wants to do. So yeah, add to another very, very confusing man. I mean, you think about what she's going through with Sir Dantos, with the Hound, and with Joffrey right now. And I guess you want to count Meryn Trant in there as well, right? So
yeah, and Cersei, like
she's having a rough time with men right now, for sure. And any problem that you guys think that you have with men, she's got it worse, for sure. She does. So that's why when I get mad when people jump all over Sansa, I'm like, what the hell would you do? How would you react to this? You know, your dad just got his head cut off like, a month ago. Now you're getting physically abused every day. And Tyrion is like the first person who actually shows her some kindness, and she doesn't know how to expect it. She keeps waiting for the bottom to fall out. I think that just shows that she's broken at this point. So yeah, definitely that stuff. I wish they'd had more of the Hound in Sansa.
Were you going to say, Madison, the Reek stuff?
That's not what I was going to say. So I was going to say the House of the Undying, because it's so magnificent in the book.
The show wasn't a mega hit yet, so they didn't have.
Yeah, and I get it. It's a budget thing. It's a set design thing. But what we got was, fine. But when you compare it to what we have on page, it's like not even in the same universe. So to me, that's like one of the biggest, like most obvious differences was how that whole experience was portrayed. But again, I do understand. I'm not mad about it, but it's pretty stark difference.
Yeah, I think the show should have had the dress that Daenerys got where like one boob hangs out. The show didn't do that. Come on. What are you guys doing?
What's up with that?
Designer failed.
But again, you wouldn't have been quite as into it because she still has singed hair that's growing back in patches in the book.
And I could be wrong about this. This is something I actually forget from the show, but is it true that, if I remember right, in the show, it's Stannis that is following Melisandre, the Red Lady, in the show? Is it in the book? It feels like it's more his wife that really is the one who converts to the religion and pushes him to convert, and is kind of the zealot in that sense. I feel like in the show, his wife is, what's her name, Cerise or
Shireen?
Shireen.
Shireen's the daughter, right?
Shireen's
So
daughter.
Shireen's the daughter. It's
Therese.
Therese. She seems kind of more meek in the show and less less kind of rigid and orthodox. Am I wrong about that?
In the show, I did get the sense that she was pretty into it as well, kind of steering that ship.
Oh, was she? Okay.
I again, it's been a while since I've seen season 2, probably 2 years or so, but I did get the sense that she was kind of in charge of that.
I watched season 1 immediately after rereading Game of Thrones, and I haven't watched season 2 of Game of Thrones.
It's time to watch season 2.
Yeah,
I think so. Okay, your favorite quote or quotes from the book?
Go ahead, Madison, because whichever one you don't use, I'll use. Because I know we.
So I already think I know which ones Mike is going to use. So again, I'm going to go with an alternate. Okay. But I am going to reference the scene
dramatic with reading. Do it. Dramatic reading.
I'm going to reference the scene with Catelyn and Jaime, which I do think was done pretty well in the show. Like again, I think the motivations are kind of different, but it's still, I think they captured the heart of that conversation. And like again, I think I think that casting was phenomenal. So I think I do enjoy that scene. But first of all, he says something kind of funny, but still devastating and dark. And then he goes into this bit, but she's like basically insinuates like, I know what you did. I know you pushed my son out of a window. And he said, I didn't write this down, but he says something to the effect of like, well, generally when I push little kids out of windows, I don't have their welfare, their health in mind. And so she's shocked and like, what the, like, and she's like, you're like the worst kind of human. Like, what about your vows? And so he goes into this monologue. And to me, this is where the reader gets a different taste of Jaime Lannister, because the first thing he said is totally on brand. Like he's pompous, he's arrogant, he makes a joke out of everybody. He thinks that, covering up his secrets and protecting his family is worth more than anything, even the life of a child. And then he goes into this about vows. He says, so many vows. They make you swear and swear, defend the king, obey the king, keep his secrets, do his bidding, your life for his, but obey your father, love your sister, protect the innocent, defend the weak, respect the gods, obey the laws. It's too much. No matter what you do, you're forsaking one vow or the other.
I use that in my Why You Should Read a Song of Ice and Fire, by the way.
I know.
One of my favorites.
So this, like, not only is that quote on its own, it shows you the depth. It shows you that he does struggle with his choices, that he's not just referencing the day-to-day choices he makes or even pushing Bran out of the window. Like he's addressing the elephant in the room. He's like, lady, you don't know what all I've been through. You don't know how what my vows mean to me. Like it's different. Okay, so all of a sudden you get this different perspective. And I think in a lot of ways this quote, and maybe this is just me reading too much into it, but I feel like it mirrors a conversation that Jon has with Commander Mormont, because he also has a conversation with Jon about vows, about how you're constantly going to be tempted. You have vows to the Night's Watch. You have vows to this. You have vows, you're not supposed to do this. And it's two perspectives on kind of the same moral question with a different take on. And I wish I'd pulled up the one from Commander Mormont as well, but I didn't. But there's a lot about vows, and there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn between those two conversations. But that whole chapter and that whole exchange between Jaime and Catelyn to me is just top tier.
Absolutely.
Nice.
With me, it's like I'm highlighting every damn line that says in this book, right? I mean, I've got several people often claim to hunger for the truth, but seldom like to taste when it's served up. I think one that I like to apply to real life is when you tear out a man's tongue, you're not proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say. But probably my favorite quote in the entire series is a layup. I mean, you all know what it is. You want to say it with me? I will hurt you for this. I don't know how yet, but give me time. A day will come when you think to yourself you're safe and happy, and suddenly your joy will turn to ashes in your mouth, and you will know that the debt is paid. Oh my God, that's just like,
I know. I love that one for you, because again, like that's like the go-to, because it's one of my favorite quotes in all literature.
Yeah, it's
like
amazing.
Much less this series. So yeah, that's just it's too good. It's too good, and that's a great again, it was delivered so well in the show too. That's one of those moments that you're like, casting, yes, thank you, we love it.
Yes,
Did we leave you any?
you stole my good ones. So I can add a couple, I guess. There is the discussion and this riddle that happens kind of early on of who's more powerful that you see repeated. Is it the priest? Is it the king? Or is it the soldier? And if I remember right, Varys says ultimately power resides where men believe it resides. And I think that that's true. He says nothing more than where people believe it resides. So I thought that was pretty profound, kind of Machiavellian. And I had forgotten how grim and stern the philosophy of the Iron Islands actually is. And this is not a profound quote that anyone will remember, but I just thought it was so evocative and gave me such a feel of the place that I felt like I could almost taste it. It said,
It's Theon wanting to taste her mother's milk, right?
no, it's not that one. Men fish in the sea, dig in the earth, and die. Women, and this is the description of the culture on Iron Islands. Men fish the sea, dig in the earth, and die. Women birth children in blood and pain and die. Night follows day, the winds and tides remain. The islands are as the gods made them. And then he goes on to say that they lived in the past, forgetting nothing and forgiving less. Like that is the Iron Islands.
And you want to go back there, Theon? It's like any moment you spend around like Pike or on the Iron Islands, their culture and their mindset is so repulsive to me. And that moment where you realize that he has a choice, like you could go back to Robb and you could really be somebody. Like you could have everything you wanted, just not under the context of the culture you were raised in. But like he had a moment there where he could have turned heel and said, you know what? Fuck you, Dad. And instead, like
he said, fuck you, sister.
Yeah, well, he already said that. But it's a tragic story. Like, because like it's easy to hate Theon because he betrays Robb and like he takes the, a sneaky weasel route. But like, at the same time, your heart kind of breaks because like that's like he was raised in a culture of abuse, until he was 9 years old or 10 years old or whatever it was. And like that, like nurture versus nature kicks in. And like all that time in Winterfell still can't get the Kraken out of your blood, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought she was going to go with Valar Morghulis.
Well, that's by itself. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. And I was going to echo your point too, Mike. When you tear out a man's tongue, you're not proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say. That is, I selected that one because that's an essential argument against censorship. The idea that when you censor speech or when you shut down one side of the argument, you're essentially proving that you're weak, that you can't handle dissent, that your argument or your position is so flimsy,
can't stand on its own. Yeah,
it can't stand on its own, that it cannot survive the open marketplace of ideas. And so I thought that was kind of a nice little John Stuart Mill-esque quote there.
Well, and I just reread Fahrenheit 451, so
there it is.
It rings even more true. Yeah,
there it is. Yeah, that's a great story about a people deciding that they no longer want freedom, right? They kind of do it to themselves. They no longer can tolerate other perspectives. I'm going to skip number 5 because we already talked about it actually. Number 6, where does a Clash of Kings rank in the grand scope of things? I remember you telling me, Mike, that just far and away, Storm of Swords is your favorite. Storm of Swords is my favorite too, but where would you place Clash of Kings?
Oh, man, I'd flip a coin between this and a Game of Thrones, really. I mean, I feel like on this reread, while I still think a Game of Thrones is perfect, like I said, it's hard for me to like look at a Clash of Kings when I think he's improved on everything from that first book and say that it's not a better book. But I mean, it's so hard for me. So that's why I say, I would say, okay, I put this second behind a Storm of Swords, and then tomorrow I'd be like, no, it's third. But those 3 books are just shuffle them really outside of Storm of Swords, which is just, like that's my favorite fantasy book, period, ever. So it's never going to be touched. But I don't know. I really can't. I mean, it's just whichever one's in my hand, that's the one that I'm reading. Right.
They ask me again after I've reread them all.
Okay.
No, I mean, honestly, like it probably third out of A Song of Ice and Fire, just because like I just can't let go of a Game of Thrones. I just can't. Maybe it's because I've reread it the most, and it's so special to me. And then A Storm of Swords objectively is probably one of the best books I've ever read. So I probably third out of all of what we have so far. But man, it's so fresh on its heels. It's hard to say anything bad about it, because I really don't think it has hardly a slow. I mean, we haven't talked much about what's going on in Winterfell, but like even the stuff going on with Bran and Mira and Maester Luwin, and like I find all of that absolutely interesting and riveting as well. So I just don't think it has a bad page in it.
Imagine having a book this good and it'd be maybe the third best in your series. Holy
Right.
shit,
Right.
Amazing.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think I need to do a reread, but for me right now, it's definitely Storm of Swords, and then Clash of Kings is going to come second, and then a Game of Thrones, and I'll leave it there. Last question, question 7. If you were to boil this book down to one concise moral lesson, and don't tell me this is unfair. I have my students do this all the time. When we read a short story or when we finish a book, I tell them to state the overarching central idea of, say, Lord of the Flies or something like that, and to express it as just kind of a simple statement. Boil the book down to one kind of moral maxim. What is the moral or thematic message of this story, do you think?
I think you should have given me more time to think about
Yeah.
that.
So this is an interesting type of question for me, because I'm not a very thematic reader. Like I love to get lost in something and literally just like bloop, shut my brain off, enter the fantasy world and be entertained. I'm a feed me reader, and I don't give a lot back. And I don't know that. I think to me, the message from this book that I get is survival. Like it's about thinking about first and foremost yourself. You have to survive if you're going to help anybody. If you have a goal, whether it is to see who you want on the throne, or to save your children, or to reclaim what you think is yours, or to just set things right, or whatever your goal is, in this book, everyone is trying to figure out how to survive. And as much as there are characters who are wanting to put others ahead of themselves, I think they're all learning that first and foremost, you have to take care of yourself and you have to survive.
I mean, the quick answer would be power, because obviously you got 5 people trying to, war for this throne, even if a couple of them are just, you're like a 16 seed, dude, sit down. But I think maybe I'd have to change up a little bit, go maybe society and class, because I think in this one's like the only one where you really get your first look at like what this is like for the common folk, the peasants, if you will. Like as you see when they have the riots in King's Landing, there obviously Joffrey thinks, oh, I'll just crush the peasants. That'll never go well. I mean, nothing will go wrong with that. We see that, hey, people almost died there. In fact, Sansa probably should have died there, if I'm being honest.
That's a great scene too, by the way.
It is. But you also see like, look, when the sacking of Winterfell's going on, how Theon's basically acting like he's above everyone. They're like, dude, you're just a ward. You're coming back here acting like you're a prince. Get the fuck out of here, So I think seeing that obviously the different ranks and how people view themselves, as well as, obviously where they actually are. And you got people wanting to call themselves kings, people wanting to call themselves princes. And I think that's probably the theme that I would go with, even though I think if you gave me more time to actually like word it out better,
sure.
I could have wrote a nice thesis paper for you, but I don't know how tough of a grader you are. So maybe you don't do this on the fly with your students like this.
Yeah, I do. But they have to write it down. So they have a few minutes to think about it and that sort of thing. I guess I could go with the one obvious one, which is that all men must die. Kind of the memento mori sort of thing that kind of Roman idea of thinking about the fact that you're immortal, and then tempering your ambitions and checking your kind of expectations. And I guess I would say one thing that I noticed this reading that I didn't notice the first reading is and this is something that very rarely do people talk about this, the importance of leadership and how utterly important power actually is. We tend to think that like politics is downstream from culture. But I sometimes think it works the opposite way. I sometimes think that culture actually flows from politics, and that's idiosyncratic and that's kind of counterintuitive to most people. But I'll give you an example of this. If you go to Germany today, East Germany is almost entirely atheistic. Like if you poll the populace, East Germany is mostly non-religious, atheist. West Germany is religious still, is largely religious. Almost the entirety of West Germany is religious. And why do you think that is? Any guess?
I don't know.
I mean, communism. So the communism in East Germany, the people living under that regime and their families, all atheist. And it's still that way today.
Right. That makes sense that it would affect the culture and the general populace and the beliefs.
And it's not like when the Berlin Wall fell, everyone was like, well, we're just going to go back to religion again. No, like politics is extremely important. And I was just thinking about that in this book, like when a leader just decides, like, we're going to switch the religion, there's so much pressure and so much incentive to just go along with it. And I also was appreciating in this book the fact that this book really demonstrates that when there isn't like a stable realm, there really is a complete and total breakdown. There's chaos, total breakdown of the old social order. So when we get like Arya's journey north with Yoren and the others, you really get a sense that everything is broken down. Like the Lannister men are attacking the men of the Night's Watch. There are no consequences for anyone's actions. Everything is in disorder and war torn. There's no law and order. Anything goes. Everything's chaos. And you really get a sense of how important that power is, and that the fact that there's some stability in the political order. And we just tend to think that it's the opposite. So those were sort of the reflections that were swirling around in my head as I was reading this, how important political power actually is, even though we don't like to admit it. We tend to think it's the reverse. It's people power. The people just decide things and they pick their rulers. Well, not in Westeros.
Yeah, there's a lot of trickle down. And I think we haven't talked that much either about what's going on north of the wall. And I think Jon is kind of going through some of this too, because his experience with not only Qhorin Halfhand and realizing that his commitment to the vision of the Night's Watch is on a whole nother level than what Jon realized that he was signing up for or was prepared for. And then he also meets Mance Rayder, and he realizes that same thing I talked about earlier with, he's just a man, just like me. And we villainize people or we put people up on a pedestal, but it's different when you kind of realize that he has, like we said with Jorah Mormont, like it's easy for Jon initially to see him as a bad guy. And then he realizes that like the wildlings are people like me as well. And there's a lot of, and I'll admit it, like I'm by no means like a Jon Snow hater or anything like that, but he's in a lot of ways one of my least favorite characters overall, but especially in book one. And he grows a lot because he feels so bad for himself for being a bastard and like, oh, boo hoo, he's so broody. But when he gets a taste of a little bit of the real world, and it's not even the real world, it's the world beyond the wall, and realizes that like, he has the ancestors of kings amongst him, and he has, people who are willing to give up everything for this cause. And he's like, I'm just here to follow my uncle. And he's like, you real quick, you got to decide, like, are you all in, or are you just here to feel sorry for yourself that you had to sit at the back of the banquet hall all those years? And like, he grows a lot. But yeah, it's like the same thing. Like he's being influenced so long by everything that's around him. And then he realized that his bubble was really small, and he's getting a lot of different perspectives from people that he has assumed were on the enemy side, that he realizes that you're really not that different. And I think this is a great takeaway in that humans we're all just human, and all of our problems are way more similar than we knew. And yeah, I really like the growth, and I like, man, the entire interaction with Craster and his keep, again, more horror elements, but also just like him realizing that like there are subcultures all around me that I knew nothing about. And it's just like this big, it's this great like medieval take on, spoiled kids stepping out of his comfort zone. I really like all that
Would
too.
you say that he knows nothing? Is that what you're trying to say right
He
now?
knows nothing.
Everything
Jon Snow.
changes when he gets a little bit of that wildling booty. So
Again,
Redheads.
George has weaknesses for redheads, I'm telling you, because it's
Yeah.
quite obvious in this book. I mean, let's be honest.
I'm missing something. I've got to hook up with a redhead or something. Open my eyes.
Find one that doesn't kill you, you're in luck. Yeah.
all right, I'm gonna close it there, guys. It was lovely chatting with you. It's about my bedtime on this.
Yeah,
here.
sorry about the power issues. So
No worries. No worries. Thank you so much for joining me, guys, and sharing your
Thanks for having me.
of course.
Very
I can
fun.
talk about these books for hours, man. It's easy to do.
Awesome.
Same. Never gets old.
Night.
All right. Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.